Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is urging Turkey to release detained American pastor Andrew Brunson. Pompeo says, quote, "The clock has run out for Ankara to free Brunson and all other Americans being held in the country." The Secretary of State met with Turkey's foreign minister earlier today on the sidelines of a meeting of regional ministers in Singapore. Turkey described the talks as constructive. This comes days after the U.S. hit Turkey with sanctions over Brunson's detainment. For more on this, I want to bring in CBSN contributor Willis Sparks. He writes for Signal, a newsletter produced by G0 Media. Willis, thanks so much for being with us.
Happy Friday.
President Trump has tweeted about Brunson. Why is this particular case so important to the president? There are many detained Americans around the world. Why is this particular person so important?
I think there are two reasons why he's personally important to Donald Trump. The first one is that Donald Trump cares very much about the opinions of evangelical Christians in the United States, whether for political reasons or personal reasons. They are a voice that he listens to. You've also got Vice President Mike Pence, who is kind of an advocate for a lot of these people within the administration who are saying, here is a man who is a pastor originally from North Carolina. He's lived in Turkey for more than 20 years, and he's been arrested probably for, trying to maybe convert Turkish Kurds to Christianity, which is what evangelical pastors do. He hasn't committed a crime. He's not a terrorist. He's not a spy. But the other reason why I think this is important to President Trump is reportedly President Trump thought he had a deal with the president of Turkey, Recep Erdogan, at the,
a sort of handshake deal?
Well, yeah. At the NATO summit about a month ago, President Trump thought that if he could arrange with the government of Israel for the release of a Turkish citizen who was accused of espionage in Israel, if that person was released, that would secure the release from Turkey of Mr. Brunson. Well, the person was released from Israel, and Turkey didn't keep its end of the bargain. What they did was they released him to house arrest.
Right.
And they thought that would be enough, as if President Erdogan thought, well, he's still a useful bargaining chip. We intend to use him again, which is, in my opinion, a spectacular bad reading of how to manage President Trump, who feels like he's been lied to.
And tricked.
And tricked. And now it's become a personal thing. We're seeing the president had already begun tweeting about Mr. Brunson already. He tweeted about him 3 times. And now Brunson has become important to President Trump in a way that he was not before, because he feels personally deceived by the president of Turkey.
And we certainly hope that Mr. Brunson comes home. But I'm curious how this is affecting, on a sort of geopolitical level, the relationship between the U.S. and Turkey. We are supposed to be NATO allies.
Right.
Is this threatening that relationship?
I think this is basically irritant number 173 in a relationship that's been going downhill for several years. Mr. Brunson was a person who was caught up in the aftermath of a failed coup in Turkey about 2 years ago, when literally thousands of people were arrested. And he was among a handful of Americans who were arrested. So there have been all kinds of irritations in U.S.-Turkey relations. I think this is really just one more. But if this is something that President Trump begins to take personally, then I think that ups the stakes and makes it possible that you could have an escalation that could make matters even worse. Turkey can't really afford to leave NATO. Of course, Turkey wants good relations with Russia, but Putin and Erdogan, the presidents of Russia and Turkey, don't really trust each other that much to begin with. Turkey is, in some ways, has a decent relationship with Iran, but the overlap there is very limited too, particularly when it comes to Syria. So basically, Turkey, no matter what they say, they need to be in NATO. They need to not have to spend the billions of dollars that would be required for Turkey's security if they left NATO. President Trump is well aware of that. That gives the President of the United States leverage. And ultimately, it will probably lead to the release of Mr. Brunson.
Right. Now, as we mentioned earlier, there are many detained Americans all around the world. Does this case resonate further to perhaps help the causes of other detained Americans, or is it very case specific?
I think it's really case specific because the relationship with every country is different, and President Trump is not unusual in the fact that there are certain voices he listens to more than others. That's true of any president.
Sure.
But this happens to be Mr. Brunson represents a constituency that President Trump cares about very much for political reasons and maybe for personal reasons. And this is a case that Mike Pence cares about very much. So it's not likely to slide off the agenda. Now, we saw that the remains of some Americans were returned from North Korea. That was also a priority issue for President Trump. So if you're trying to get somebody released, if you can find a way to make the case to President Trump that politically it's very important to advance that cause, then maybe you can make more progress than had been made in the past in some of these other cases. Right. I suspect that Mr. Brunson will be returned in an amount of time that allows Turkey to save face, but I think he's probably coming home.
Well, let's hope so.